I'm good, I'm going.
I got speed.
Okay. All right. Did you want to sit or do you want to stand?
Sorry,
I don't want you to.
Usually I can look at, it's like a little paranoia thing. Usually I can look at my
Oh, I see.
clock ticking down and like know in my heart that it's recording, but I'll just have to have faith that the little red light is on across the room. Okay.
Okay. I'll wait you all.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can I help you get that?
Oh.
It's okay.
She's like, I'm okay.
Okay.
And really quickly, and it's Julie, and then what's your last name?
Kleese.
Kleese.
Uh-huh,
Okay.
correct.
And just really quickly, how long have you been a nurse for? Just so we can.
I've been a nurse for 10 years in the ICU. Mm-hmm.
Got it. Okay. And I guess we just kind of wanted to start off with like maybe one or two kind of more like factual just questions, and then get into talking about your own personal experience, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I guess for me, I know I've talked to a number of smaller hospitals, rural Southern Oregon. We've been to Bend, and like many hospitals, they're overrun with COVID patients. I mean, they were talking about having to try to outsource patients to Spokane, to San Francisco. They're doing all these mitigation tactics. How does the situation in rural Oregon, smaller places, Southern Oregon and Bend, places like that affect OHSU, and what distinguishes OHSU from some of those smaller places, do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good question. OHSU, we serve a huge community. So we serve, kind of the whole Pacific Seaboard. We have responsibilities to serve Alaska, Washington, Idaho, Montana, California, Nevada. These partners look to us to send their sickest, most complex patients to OHSU. And so our unit, even before COVID, we would get the most interesting, unique cases to come here because we have some of the best specialists on this side of the country. So those patients still exist, outside of COVID. And so when our rural communities are suffering, they're sending some of their sickest patients to us, not to mention the rest of the community is still suffering from other diseases. So we are stretched to the max. We have the most COVID we've ever had, and our COVID patients are we're giving them every kind of treatment that they can receive that we can offer to save their lives. And so our acuity is as high as it's ever been. The sickness of the patients is as high as it's ever been. So our staffing is really limited. For each of these patients requires so much intensive care and monitoring and thought to go into how can we best serve this patient, what kind of things can we offer, where are they at in their sickness process. Meanwhile, our physicians are just being called at every opportunity. Can you take this patient? Can you help us consult on this patient? This patient is 26 and dying. This patient is 21 and dying. This patient is a father of 4 and dying. Can you help us? Our rural partners are struggling. They're at the limit of their capabilities, and that's when they turn to us, and the inn is full. So when our rural communities suffer, we suffer as well because they're an extension of our service, and so it's really hard to serve those communities and see them suffer.
So, are you working today? Did you come?
Yeah, I'm working today.
Can you tell us just a little bit about what your shift is like today and what the hardest part has been?
Yeah. So today I'm serving in a role that is a support nurse, and so my role not only serves our unit, it serves the whole hospital in general. So I'm part of our code response team. So if there's a code in the hospital, I'm part of the response team that helps provide resuscitation efforts for the patient, and then usually transfer them back to our unit to continue resuscitating them. Right now we don't have a bed for a patient, so we would have to try and find a place in another ICU to put that patient if that were to happen. And so far I haven't gotten a page yet, which is great. But then the rest of my
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding that. So if you got a call that somebody you can't take any more COVID patients into your medical ICU, which is supposed to be where they're all
We can't take
landing.
any patients at all. Yeah. So we don't have any physical space to put any patients. And we have COVID patients that are being cared for by our service that are not in our ICU. So we're starting to having to put them in other ICUs within our hospital.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And really quickly, sorry to interrupt. Julie, if you don't mind, I know it's super natural to like look at the person who asked the question, but
sure.
if you could actually, even when Amelia asks her question, if you could look at me,
Okay.
that would be amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
And would totally work for the TV.
Oh, sure.
purposes of
Sorry.
it. No, don't even worry.
Mm-hmm.
But also quickly jumping on that, and also you were talking about we have to struggle to find ICU beds. Are you then also looking outside of the region? I mean, you get calls from all over the place. Hey, can you take so and so? Can you take so and so? Are you also trying to outsource, like calling others? Can you take patients?
No, I mean we don't have anyone to call. We're who people call, so we don't have anyone to call to put people. So hospital administration, as far as I'm aware, is trying to create space for that with our COVID plan, whether that is flowing into our OR recovery rooms, stopping surgeries, and then utilizing those nurses to step into the role of ICU nursing and care for those COVID patients, because there is nowhere else for them to go. So, and then to address your question, yeah, so if there is a code today, we will have to find space on another unit to place a patient. We don't have any space in our unit physically to put a patient. And then this is my day 4 of 4 in a row. And my 3 prior days, I do a modality called ECMO, which is extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. So basically, if you know how dialysis works, dialysis is a big filter for the kidneys when the kidneys don't work. This is similar that that when your lungs are so injured, so inflamed, and a ventilator, a breathing machine isn't enough to provide the oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange, that this machine we put in large diameter IVs, about the diameter of my thumb, into your body, and then we take your blood out, we do the oxygen and CO2 exchange, and then we supply it back to the person. It is the highest form of life support that we can provide, and so the past 3 days, I took care of my patient who was on ECMO, which is what I do the majority of my time. I split my time between ECMO and then this role.
Did the microphone?
I apologize.
Fall in. Richard.
Sorry.
I'm so sorry.
Be careful.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure. Did it?
It picked up.
Okay.
We can
Okay.
fix it.
Okay.
Everything's good.
Do you need me to repeat anything?
Nope.
Okay.
We can make it work.
Okay.
It didn't run too
Be careful with my hand gestures. Keep my hands in my lap.
You talked about caring for your patients on ECMO and others who may come in or who are in the ICU. Is there any level of anger or frustration? Because we've heard many times this was preventable. Get a vaccine, wear a mask, and the last I heard, 100% of the people in the ICU were unvaccinated.
Yeah, I think there is, I think the most dominating emotion that I feel is grief for these people. I think there are people who are vaccine hesitant because they don't have access to good resources, or they don't have, equitable resources in their own lives to be able to get access to vaccines. So I think there can be misplaced anger for people who simply don't have the right information or don't have the right access to the resources. And we see those people suffering. And I would be lying if I say there isn't anger for people who are vaccine deniers or believe conspiracy theories or have a lot of misguided information about this, and then end up in our hospital suffering and dying. And sometimes they will say, I was wrong, when can I get the vaccine? Sometimes they'll deny it to their dying breath. and sometimes they don't get to ever know what their outcome is because they die too soon. So there are a lot of different outcomes these patients can have, but I think the dominant emotion for me is grief. Watching my colleagues and I still work just as hard to save everybody's lives and treat people equitably, but it's just a very different landscape than it was last year at this time, and it is really hard to see us reaching our highest numbers ever and know that we're not yet at the peak. Yeah.
And did you have
I think.
want me to continue on my?
Why don't you continue and then
Okay.
if you can save me a little.
Yeah.
Time at the end.
So, I don't know what the policy is right now, whether those in ICU can get family members visiting or not, or if that just kind of fluctuates, or it depends on the situation. But, we've heard about healthcare workers just being stretched to the limit, right? I mean, mentally, emotionally, physically, working all those long hours and shifts. I mean, walk me through just the emotions. I mean, I know that you said you feel grief. Do you ever find yourself having to be kind of take on a different role for somebody, a role of a family member even who can't be there, and how does that affect you? I mean, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I think that death has always been a big part of our unit. We have like I said, some of the most complex patients, in the hospital and on the West Coast. But this year, more than ever, when families weren't able to be there with their loved ones, we have stepped in that role. And it is a real honor to be there with people in their time of grief and their time of death. But it is a really different capacity. I think the grief is really compounded when you are the loved one that's with them. And I think the grief, we haven't really had an opportunity to attend to any of the grief we experienced over the last year to be taking on more. So I think that's where you hear a lot about burnout and people being stretched to their emotional limits. I think that it's really hard to encapsulate all that goes on with a person at the end of their life, whether they're conscious or not. And what can you say? I know the depth of grief that I would feel if I couldn't be with my loved one as they died. So I take the responsibility very seriously to love that person as if they were my own family member, and provide them with a death that's dignified and honorable as much as possible in an ICU that is sterile and cold and unforgiving.
So I just want to acknowledge what you just said, and that you've been in this year of just relentless grief, and it's starting all over again, and you guys haven't even had the time to recover from the fall, the winter, and everything else that's gone on. And I know how I feel about this pandemic. I know, I've been with one person when they've died, and that's it. And I can't imagine the weight of that. And I'm so sorry that you are shouldering so much of this burden for all of us collectively.
Thank you. Yeah.
What do you want people to understand about what it's like to die of COVID or to be in the ICU with COVID that you think people don't really get or can't fully comprehend?
I don't think people have an inkling of the amount of suffering that you will experience being sick with COVID. It is extremely painful. being critically ill is a very traumatizing experience. It is confusing, it's scary, you're alone with strangers, you don't recognize their voices. You lose your free will being in the hospital. All of your bodily functions are not your own, they're taken over by other people and machines. You lose the ability to speak, to swallow, to breathe on your own. The ability to touch your face and your body of free will because you have too many lines and tubes that are vital to your survival. I think the loss of your free will is what people don't understand, being sick, being critically ill with COVID in the ICU. And that's only if you survive. Your recovery is long, an undeterminate amount of time to what state of independence you will ever return to, your mental capacity, your physical capacity. It is an extremely lonely experience, a depressing experience. And for your loved ones as well, they'll suffer. They will absolutely suffer watching you struggle. A lot of times people who are in the ICU receive medications that provide sedative and even effects that will affect your memory, but your family members, if they get to see you, whether it's on a video camera or in person, they will see you suffer greatly. And it's really unnecessary. I mean, it's totally avoidable. I think that's the most heartbreaking part of it. And as I mentioned, I'm very grateful and I feel honored to have this role, but your community and your healthcare workers are also suffering watching you struggle and to keep you from dying.
To get her back to the bed, how about one more question, you guys?
I guess, we've heard that the stress of doing your work, I mean, we know, we've heard from many healthcare workers that it's so tough, it's so difficult. What have you been hearing from your colleagues around you? Have you thought about leaving medicine? I mean, I'm so sad to hear it from other nurses and other folks, but that's what I've heard elsewhere. Has that crossed your mind?
I think that the reality of the job and its effect on my own physical and mental health, have not gone unnoticed, especially this last, year and a half. I think that I've had to set some realistic boundaries for myself about how much I can work and what's unhealthy for me. But it's also really hard when every day I get text messages and pleas from our coworkers, like, can anybody come in for 4 hours? Just come in for a couple hours. Can anybody stay over? To know that your coworkers are suffering and that patients are suffering is a really hard balance to be able to draw a boundary for yourself of what I can physically and emotionally handle. I feel fortunate that I have an incredible team of people I work with. It was an incredible team before we entered COVID, and they have only just started to shine. We really pick each other up, and our management team has done nothing but just fight to get us the appropriate equipment that we need to do our job safely, check in with us, and as a team, checking in with each other, just holding space for each other. I think if I hadn't have had that, it would not be a sustainable job. So I feel extremely fortunate to have that. I feel extremely fortunate to have my family and my friends supporting me, to know that I have some respite in them and support outside of the hospital. but at the same time, it is an extremely difficult job, and I don't see it getting easier anytime soon.
I think my last question is, what makes you hopeful, and what keeps you doing this work?
I think despite the depth of grief we're experiencing and seeing the projections of some really terrible data, to know that we're not at the peak yet, once again, the colleagues that I have working beside me, doing the hard work with me and lifting me up, to know there's people around the world doing this exact same thing and still all working towards a common goal, to know that, to feel, faith and comfort in the scientists who work so hard to protect so many by getting a vaccine rolled out to us. That just brings me a lot of faith in humanity. There's still a lot to be hopeful for.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate all you do.
Yeah.
Really powerful message. I think people will hear it. I think it will get through to people, and I so appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks. Sorry.
Julie,
Okay,
Thank you.
on a personal note, I was in this ICU with my own mother before COVID, and
Oh, wow.
just from the bottom of my heart, you guys make such a difference in people's lives. I mean, everything you do is, there is no greater service.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It means a lot to me. Thank you guys for coming,
Thank
giving
you, Julie.
a picture of what we do. I hope it. I really hope it makes a difference.
It will. It will.
If we do our jobs any bit as good as you do your job,
Yeah,
it should.
it
That's
should.
on us, is to make sure that people hear it and pay attention.
Thank you.
You don't have to carry that responsibility.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie.